Meditations with Ryan Zlomek.
Hello and welcome to episode 33. This is the Meditations Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Zlomek, and this is a show all about making space for conversations with interesting people just to see what we can pick up along the way. I'm a firm believer that if we open up ourselves to dialogue with other people, we're always going to find ways to make our lives better. And I gotta say that today's guest is somebody who has truly enhanced mine both directly and indirectly. On the show today is Joel Capolongo. Joel is the co-owner of Strong Hearts Café in Syracuse, New York. They also have a location in Buffalo called Strong Hearts 716. Joel and his buddy Nick Ryan started Strong Hearts Café in 2008. And if you're unfamiliar with the Strong Hearts brand, it is an all-vegan cafe. Sometimes when people hear the term all vegan, they think that it's just going to be nothing but plants that are kind of mushed together and then served on a platter in a way that looks the least bit appetizing. But Strong Hearts is a business that right from the beginning was determined to be iconic comfort food, and they're known for their egg trick muffin and for their sweet sassy molassy sandwich, and most notably for their amazing rockin' delicious sugary milkshakes. So if you're unfamiliar with Strong Hearts and the brand, by the end of this episode, you're going to have a really cool understanding of the background of it. In this conversation, Joel and I are going to talk about him growing up and discovering veganism through the local music community of Syracuse, his sort of religious upbringing, looking at Strong Hearts as sort of an aspirational goal that popped up through a fun conversation with Nick, and then sort of peeking behind the scenes to see how Strong Hearts is operated, and to see what sort of ethical base it exists on. And one of my favorite things is we talk about the sort of secondary components of Strong Hearts, including the vegan run group that they put together. So without further ado, I think I've already talked too much. Let's jump into this. Here is Joel Capolongo. Joel, thanks so much for coming on the show, and you get to be an in-person interview. Thank you for supporting my business skill shot and coming to check it out.
Absolutely. First time here, and I can't wait to play some games after we're done.
Yeah. This is the reward Joel gets for dealing with my conversational antics. So, I appreciate that before we started, you said you listen to the show, so you're probably used to these questions a little bit, but I do have sort of a fun fascination just with the way in which we grow up and how that impacts us, specifically geographically. And I know that you're from the huge booming metropolis of Central Square, New York. Which, for anybody who's unaware, is just above the booming metropolis of Syracuse, New York. And I was curious about, when you were a kid, I know that, toward the end of your high school experience, you kind of found punk and hardcore, and that had a very substantial impact on you. And we'll get to that. But what was young Joel Capolongo like? What kind of stuff were you obsessed with kind of in your youth and preteens?
Yeah, great question. You're going way back now. I was raised in a pretty strict home. I was raised in a very religious home. My parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. For those unfamiliar, it's a pretty rigid belief system. So that's how I was raised. My mother and my sister taught me to read when I was 4 years old so I could read the Bible, which actually gave me a huge advantage because I could read at 4 years old. So when I went to kindergarten, I was already reading while the other kids were eating paste and crayons. So I went to 2 weeks of kindergarten and they're like, this kid does not need to be here. So I skipped kindergarten and went right to first grade. So that gave me a little bit of an advantage, I would say. Probably a little bit of adjustment socially for a new 5-year-old to be a first grader, but I graduated high school when I was 17 years old. And so young Joel was raised in a very religious home out in the country. Central Square, as you noted, is a very rural community, about a half an hour north of Syracuse. I grew up doing normal country boy stuff, to be honest with you. Fishing, hunting, even trapping. I spent most of my time outside. When I was a little bit older, preteen years, I got into skateboarding, and I've always been big into sports. I played all the sports I could play when I was younger. Yeah, hanging out with neighborhood kids, running around the woods, going sledding, getting in snowball fights. Pretty normal country boy stuff, I would say.
Yeah, and like Central Square, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but like, uh, has like I know that you found like metal music like pretty young, and like you were like pretty into metal stuff, and it has like a strange history with metal. Like, doesn't one of the members of Mudvayne like was like from Central Square? I think I heard recently, and then like Just Joe of like Brave New Sin is like
Yeah.
from there. And there's a bunch of other kind of punk and hardcore people that like found their way out of Central Square into the metal scene.
I'm not sure about the Mudvayne connection, but I know Joel Capologo, now known as Just Joe of Brand New Sin, went to the same high school I did in Central Square. He was a couple of years ahead of me, but there was, I found hardcore, went to my first show in 1992, and back then there was definitely a hardcore punk rock contingent in the high school, and once I found that crew, I really vibed with them and identified with them and kind of hung out with them, and my life definitely changed from that point on for sure.
Yeah, I remember hearing a story about like you getting a cassette for Sick of It All because they were playing, and then going to see Sick of It All at the Lost Horizon.
For sure. Yeah, it was blood, sweat, and no tears. My friend Jeremy Frary let me borrow, and went to my first hardcore show in November of 1992. It was Sick of It All. And it was a life-changing moment for me, for sure. That's one of like the defining moments of my life. Just walking into the Lost Horizon as a 15-year-old from the country, and just kind of seeing things I had never even heard of before. Like slam dancing and moshing, and Sick of It All obviously is from New York City, so they had their crew with them, and there was men, women, young, old, black, white, mohawks, skinheads, long hairs. It just was the wildest group of people. And to a 15-year-old from the country, that's like an incredible experience. I might as well have been on another planet when I walked into the Lost Horizon that afternoon. So definitely a defining moment in my life. And I wouldn't be the same if I hadn't gone to that show that day.
Yeah, and like the other thing that, and this is like going to be a very niche question, but like, I was curious about like your kind of like work life when you were younger. Like, I know that you worked at a gas station. You have like a very amazing anecdote about like kind of learning about work ethic from your dad involving a raincoat, which is a story.
It's true. Wow. Yeah, you've definitely done your history, your research.
Yeah, but I was curious about like when did you start kind of joining the workforce?
Early. I would say my first job was when I was possibly 14. My very, very first job, a friend of mine from church owned a screen printing shop, and as t-shirts would come out of the dryer, I would catch them and then fold them and put them into boxes. That was my very first job. I was 14 years old. I probably got, paid a few bucks an hour under the table. And then from there, I believe I worked at a diner in Central Square as a dishwasher. I would go to school and then walk from school to the diner, which was only a few blocks away because it's a very small town, and wash dishes until close. And I would do that a few nights a week. And then I got a job at a gas station that was a few blocks away from that, as one would do in a very small country town. So I would say I've been consistently working since I was probably 15. And then like I said earlier, I graduated when I was 17 and moved out of my parents' house in Central Square probably 2 months later and moved to Syracuse, and I've been employed ever since. Yeah.
Good job. Proud of you, Joel. I alluded to sort of the rain jacket story, but like you tell a story about the fact that you worked at this full service gas station that had no overhead covering, and you were going and kind of pumping gas, and it starts pouring. You go outside to like grab the community raincoat, and it's not there, kind of at that point called your father to help you out and take you home and kind of close up the gas station early, and he just brought you a new set of clothes and a raincoat and said, you're going to finish your shift. This is what the Capolongos do. And I'm curious about like that kind of grit, like how other than just like I'm in the workforce and like obviously like the religious aspect of your family is like very militant, but like how did you sort of see that grit kind of like evolving in you, by the time you kind of like left, you left Central Square and kind of made your way into Syracuse?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that was probably another defining moment in my life. That story you just alluded to. My father basically not allowing me to quit, just telling me you're going to finish your shift. I called him to come pick me up because I didn't want to work anymore. I didn't have a raincoat. It was pouring rain. I was the only one at the gas station. And in his mind, he wanted to teach me a lesson probably. And he also wanted to make sure that I didn't quit in the future. And that was his whole point, is like, if you quit now, you take the easy road now, you're always going to take the easy road. So I guess I carried that with me, from that point on. When I moved to Syracuse, I actually lived with John McKeag. I answered a classified ad out of the back of the Syracuse New Times, called his number, 424-9071. Didn't realize it was John McKeag's number. And I ended up being roommates with John when I was 17 years old, and I needed to work because I needed to pay rent. And I didn't really have a choice, I did not want to admit defeat or failure and move back in with my parents. So the only other choice was to work and to make money. And I feel like those initial lessons that my father taught me back at the gas station in Central Square stuck with me. It's like, you have to make your own way. You can't quit. You have to grind it out. And I feel like that's kind of what I've always taken with me in my adult life, is there's no safety net. You have to make your own way in the world, and you have to grind and hustle and figure out a way to get through it. So I would say that lesson has definitely stayed with me through my adult life.
Yeah, and for listeners out there who are wondering, like, okay, John McKeag, who is this the Mr. Rogers of Syracuse? Like, John McKeag was a local kind of punk and hardcore dude that booked a lot of shows and was a very prominent presence, especially in the rise of like 90s vegan straight edge, and the sort of rise of Syracuse as like a punk and hardcore staple in the United States. So the fact that like you answered a random ad and it happened to be the guy who like is at shows making speeches and like, anybody got anything they want to say? Okay, here's the first band. Like, the fact that that's the guy you lived with is like such a fantastic serendipitous thing.
It was a wild coincidence, and a very beneficial one, obviously, because bands would stay at his house all the time, and I got to meet bands from all over the country and the world, just by happenstance. I happened to answer an ad in the back of the Syracuse New Times, and it was the guy in Syracuse that promoted shows at the time. So it worked out well.
That's amazing. So going back to your time at Central Square real quick, and, we talked about the infamous Sick of It All show that you went to. And from what I understand, there was a group tabling vegan and animal rights literature at that show that resulted in you going vegetarian and then shortly after that going vegan. And I was curious, like, not necessarily about that transition, but more about kind of like the response from like your family and your like local community when you decided that like veganism was going to be a part of your life.
Yeah, I would say my family was a little bit indifferent. I think, I was 15 at the time, so most 15-year-olds don't stick with things very long. They decide they, want different colored hair or a piercing. Usually that's a phase, and I think that's what my parents thought. But as the years went by, they realized, okay, there's something to this. And I grew up in a home where my mom cooked virtually every meal from scratch. That's just the way my father was raised, and that's what he wanted, so that's what my mom did. So there was something always cooking in the house, and sometimes I helped, sometimes I didn't. But I think my mom eventually liked the fact that she had to cook something different for me because it was out of the norm, and I think she liked finding vegan recipes. I mean, we're talking like this is 1993 and 1994. Veganism was a much different thing back then. So I still don't think my dad really cared either way, but I think eventually my mom sort of enjoyed the challenge of coming up with vegan meals for me in 1994. So
Yeah, and then you got really into social justice really early. Like knowing when to stand out and call out something, or trying to provoke people to recognize when there were things that ethically were not agreeable to you. And I'm curious about like your journey with that as well. I'll just bluntly state that like on Facebook a few days ago you kindly posted a picture of you getting arrested, that I had never seen before. So I'm curious about like that part of your existence as well.
Sure. I mean, I've always kind of felt like an outsider due to my religious upbringing. The Jehovah's Witness religion is it isolates itself on purpose from others. So when I went to school, I wasn't allowed to celebrate holidays or birthdays. Like I literally couldn't be in the room, So from a very, very young age, I was always an outsider, or at least I felt like an outsider. So I never really, when I, became vegan and became an animal rights activist, never really felt weird or bad or different to stand out, because I kind of always felt that way as a younger person. So the more I learned about vegetarianism and veganism, and back then it meant like there was no internet, so you couldn't just like go to YouTube and find a video of animal cruelty. You had to like read a book or read pamphlets or literature or zines, and like write to companies and request those things in the mail and wait for them and open those packages excitedly when they came and read that information. And the more I did that, the more I read. That the book that really kind of cemented my decision to go vegan was a book called Diet for a New America by John Robbins. And when I read that book, I knew I had to do everything I could to educate people on the benefits of being vegan. And not only that, but do my part to try and stop animal cruelty whenever I could. So that's kind of how the activism started. At that show in 1992, I saw a group there called the Animal Defense League, and they were kind of like the local grassroots militant animal rights group at the time. And as soon as I graduated high school, I kind of fell in with them and started going to protest, and eventually organized the group myself and led all kinds of protests, marches, and civil disobedience actions all around Syracuse. So at last count, I think, from then until, I haven't been arrested in quite a long time, but my last arrest, I think we're up to 20 arrests all around the country for animal rights related reasons.
And what kind of, I don't know, like what kind of gatherings or, would you organize? Like, can you just give an example of like the type of place where you would get a group of people together to point out like the cruelty that's happening?
Sure. I mean, back in the mid 90s, our largest target was Giorgio's Furs in downtown Syracuse on South Salina Street, right next to the Landmark Theater. We campaigned against his fur shop for years. We would go to his home and protest and hold candlelight vigils for the animals that died to put clothing on his shelves. So I would say Giorgio's was a huge target back in the 90s. We protested the circus whenever they came to town, their mistreatment of animals there. We did some protests at Bristol Myers Squibb and their animal research that happens right down the street from here, actually. So I would say those were the main targets back in the 90s. And then also just setting up informational tables at hardcore shows where we try to get people to read literature about veganism.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, in the not getting arrested category, what kind of jobs were you working? Like, I'm very curious about like what kind of stuff Joel Capologo was getting his fingers into when he entered,
Sure.
Syracuse.
Yeah, right out of high school, when I moved to Syracuse, I got a job at the East Syracuse Walmart. And I remember the store had just opened. This was 1994, and they were hiring for all positions. And I remember the person I spoke with saying that the overnight position paid $1 more. So I was like, well, sure, I'll do that. So I think it was like $8 an hour at the time. So I unloaded trucks at Walmart and stocked shelves overnight, and did that for a while, probably 3 or 4 years.
And then were you working in food service like at this, like in any
No.
of these spaces prior to Strong Hearts?
No, my only food service job prior to Strong Hearts was that dishwashing job at the Greasy Spoon Diner up in Central Square when I was 15 years old.
Okay, awesome. One of the things that I want to point out, and you usually talk about this in your interviews, is just the fact that like we're right now in such a culture of, like there's vegans everywhere and there's vegan options everywhere, but like the culture of like vegan food, in the 90s, early 2000s was a truly a DIY phenomenon where you could either find the one option, the one salad at the one restaurant that didn't have Parmesan on it, or you could make your own food. It's cool that you like had a group of people that were, like a part of this sort of vegan movement. What kind of stuff did you like eating back then, Joel?
Yeah, I remember back when I was still in high school, there was one health food store that I would go to buy vegan things. And I remember this was back even before like Boca made like Boca burgers. There was one like veggie burger mix that came in a box. You had to like add water and other things to it to make, and then hand form these like vegetable patties that you would cook. And that was like the veggie burger, and the store was called, I don't think it's still there, but it was called Mother Earth. It was on South Bay Road in North Syracuse. And my parents would drive me there every so often to stock up on those boxed veggie burgers you had to make yourself. And I remember getting rice milk from there and just thinking it was terrible, but I had to act like it was good because I wanted my parents to keep taking me there. Rice milk is just really watery and thin. And of course it was like shelf stable in a box. It wasn't even refrigerated, but that's what we had back then. And looking back on it, like I'm glad that's how I was introduced to veganism, because I feel like if it was like that now, veganism wouldn't be the thing that it is, because you really had to work for it back then, and you really had to believe in it, and there had to be like a serious ethical basis for it, because it was difficult. You had to work for it. You had to learn how to cook. There weren't vegan restaurants in this area at the time, so potlucks were a big thing. Usually on the weekends or after protests, we would have like a big vegan potluck. People would bring stuff that they made from home, and we would share food. Lots of vegetable-centric dishes, lots of hummus and carrots and basic crunchy stuff like that.
Do you remember like a moment where like you like mastered something for a potluck, or like some sort of food that you were like, I've broken the code. I like made this thing that's delicious.
My big thing back then, and still to this day, like one of the things that is one of my go-tos, is I make a really good lasagna. It's easy to make in big batches, and it makes a lot. And just any kind of like pasta salad creation, pasta, veggies, Italian dressing, some herbs and spices. I remember those two things kind of being my go-to, and it's honestly like I just made lasagna last week, like in a giant thing of it just for myself. So pasta salad for me is more of a summertime thing, but yeah, I would say those two things are my go-tos.
I was just having a conversation with my dad a few weeks ago about like, how do you judge an Italian restaurant? He's like, it's the lasagna. It's like you go, you try the lasagna, you know how good the food is there based on like how well that's prepared. So you do the perfect Italian taste test meal there, Joel.
Yeah, I was, like I said earlier, I was raised in a home where meals were cooked from scratch almost daily, and in a very Italian home, so I'm talking sauce from scratch. My mom making meatballs and sausage, and literally hand making pasta, like raviolis from scratch. So that's just how I was raised. I love Italian food. I love all kinds of food, but Italian's kind of like my fallback comfort food, I would say.
Awesome. Well, shifting forward a little bit, because we'll eventually get out of the point where you're no longer in your teens. Oh, wait, I think we're there. You've been involved in a lot of activism work, and one that I'm ashamed to say I haven't had a chance to research as much, but I know you take a lot of pride in, was your work with Sea Shepherd, which from what I understand was a kind of a 4-month jaunt going, or I don't know, maybe more, maybe less, to kind of tackle whaling ships and make sure that you're getting in the way of their productivity.
Yeah, that was back in 2005. I guess backtracking a little bit, when I lived in California, I lived in Los Angeles from 1999 to 2002. And when I was in LA, I met a woman named Allison Lance, who went on to marry Paul Watson, the head of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. And when I left LA, I stayed in touch with Allison. She was a good friend and another animal rights activist. Well, I remember her, I believe she emailed me in like the summer of 2005 and said, hey, we're getting a crew together to go to Antarctica to interfere in a Japanese whale hunt. Are you interested? And I remember thinking, heck yeah, I'm interested. That's the family-friendly version of the podcast. And then I reached out to my friends, Jeff Watkins and Justin Palingra, two very close friends of mine, and said, hey, I'm going to Antarctica with the Sea Shepherds. Are you guys interested? And they said, heck yeah, we are. So the three of us left Syracuse on Thanksgiving Day in 2005. And I believe we returned to Syracuse in mid-February of 2006. So we were gone, I think, a little over 3 months. We flew to Melbourne, Australia, helped get the ship ready for departure for a couple weeks. And then we left Melbourne and sailed to Hobart, Tasmania, where we picked up a helicopter for our ship. There was actually a helicopter on the ship that was used as like a scouting device to find the Japanese whaling fleet, because the radar only went so far. But when you're much higher in the sky, you have a much broader range of vision. So there was a helicopter on board. And then once we left Hobart, Tasmania, we set sail for the Southern Ocean in Antarctica. And we spent probably 45 to 55 days at sea without ever returning to land, intentionally trying to obstruct and sabotage the Japanese whaling fleet, which I believe at the time consisted of 5 ships. There was one like mothership called the Nishin Maru, which was like the factory ship where the 4 other harpoon vessels, they would kill the whales and then bring them back to the factory ship to be processed. So we basically chased those ships around the ocean for a month and a half, obstructing their hunts. I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be on one of the Zodiac boats, which is like a small inflatable boat that was launched from our main ship. And I was with a crew of, I believe, 3 or 4 others on the Zodiac boat, actively trying to interfere and foul the propeller of the factory ship so it would stop dead in the water and we can continue to sabotage it from there. So that was kind of cool, being like in Antarctica in the Zodiac boat trying to disable the Japanese factory ship. I mean, it was right there. It was so close we could touch it, so it was kind of cool to be on the front lines of like that direct action. And it felt good, putting honestly, like my life on the line. It's what I believed in, and it's what the entire crew believed in. So yeah, that was a pretty seminal moment, I would say, being there in Antarctica, trying to stand up for marine life in the oceans. Once that campaign was over, we returned to port in Cape Town, South Africa, and myself and Jeff and Justin spent about a week just relaxing and getting our land legs back after being on the ocean for a month and a half. And then we returned to Syracuse. So yeah, that's kind of the whole story in a nutshell.
Yeah, and just some nuts and bolts questions. Like what tactics did you guys have in order to sort of like disrupt the propellers of these ships?
Right. So picture 2 very large buoys with a very thick rope that connects them. So what we would do is we would take the Zodiac boat and get in front of the Nishin Maru factory ship and place the rope and the buoys in front of their ship. And the buoys and the rope would go underneath their ship, underneath the hull of their ship. And we were hoping that it would get sucked into the propeller once it came out the back of the ship. and we tried to do that for hours. It was unsuccessful, and they spent a lot of time just trying to get away from us, which was a good thing, because any time they spend fleeing us is time they're not killing and processing whales. So even though like our intentional act of economic sabotage didn't work that time, just the fact that we were there harassing them during their hunt, which was illegal, by the way. It was in a whale sanctuary.
It was, to clarify, it was illegal for them to be whaling there.
Correct. Commercial whaling has been banned since 1986. And the loophole that Japan uses to continue commercial whaling in disguise is claiming it's scientific research. Scientific research whaling has not been banned, but Japan continues to commercially whale under the guise of it being scientific research. So that's the loophole they use to continue to kill whales in the southern oceans.
Fascinating. And then obviously this is a pretty huge operation, right? Like this is like you have a helicopter.
It sounds like it's a huge operation. If you've seen Whale Wars, it's a pretty ragtag band of misfits, There was 44 people on the ship. And I was a deckhand. I was just like, which is pretty much just like a worker bee who just does whatever I'm told to do, whether that's cleaning, sweeping, painting,
getting buoys.
Yeah. Crafting devices to commit economic sabotage. So our ship at the time, so this was before Whale Wars. This was a year before, like, the organization got really, really famous. So the budget was pretty thin. So I would say it sounds like a huge operation. And the helicopter, I'm guessing, was probably the most expensive part of the whole thing. But it was an entirely volunteer grassroots group at the time still.
Yeah, and when I say, like, substantial operation, I'm just saying, like, the fact that you can get 44 people who believe in this so thoroughly in their souls that they are going to, like, uproot their lives for 3 months and make this happen, that's awesome. Like, that is so cool. Like, I just get overjoyed whenever, like, people who are passionate about the same things find each other, and to find 44 people who are like, all right, we're going to go screw this whole regime up. That's a pretty magical thing, even if it is mildly criminal.
It was an amazing experience. And, there's a lot of downtime. A lot of times you're just like in pursuit of the ships, and that's sometimes days or weeks at a time. So there's a lot of time to talk to other people, find out how they got from Brazil to the ship, and just hearing about their experiences and why they're so committed to protecting animals. It was an amazing experience. And I don't know if I would jump at the chance to do it at this point in my life, but it definitely, at that time, I wasn't even 30 years old. So I had the time to do it and the will, and it was definitely the right choice at that time.
That's awesome. Well, the other thing that you found the will to do was found Strong Hearts Cafe. And I'm going to start off with a really niche question that I can't find answered. Are you ready, Joel?
Sure.
So as the great myth of Syracuse culinary has it, you and Nick Ryan went to a concert in New York City, and on your way back started talking about what you would do if you would open your own vegan diner or vegan cafe, and that's where it started. Is that a correct story?
It is, yeah.
Okay. What concert did you see?
So this would have been late 2007, and Snapcase played. And I believe it was for the release of a book at the time. I want to say it was, don't quote me on this, but it had something to do with that antimatter zine. The author of that zine had come out with a book, and it was like a book release show. And I believe, well, I know Snapcase headlined, and they hadn't played a show at that time in a very long time. So Nick and I were stoked to go check out Snapcase, and that's why we were in New York City.
Oh, that's amazing. And just for listeners out there who are unfamiliar with Snapcase, you should listen to them because they're great. But they're also from Buffalo, where you guys happen to also have a Strong Hearts location.
That's true, yes.
Fascinating. See, it was all planned right from the beginning. So you go to this concert, you see Snapcase, you guys are sweaty, you're driving back. What is that conversation like? Like, what what is getting you jazzed about this dialogue, and what kind of elements of this cafe are you focusing on in that dialogue?
So before we left to come back to Syracuse, we spent the night at my friend's apartment in Long Island City, which is just between Queens and Brooklyn, right on the water. And we stopped at this little place for breakfast. It was called Community Cafe, Community TEA. And it had chalkboard menus and large windows that faced the street and a few vegan options, not many. But we kind of looked around and we were super into the vibe of the place, and the fact that it had vegan options was super cool. So that kind of sparked the conversation. We kind of looked around and we're like, if this place was in Syracuse and it was all vegan, it would be amazing. So that's kind of how the conversation started. We spent the 4-hour car ride back to Syracuse kind of daydreaming up a vegan cafe. And, where would it be? What would it look like? What would the menus look like? At the time, there was this place in Brooklyn called Food Swings, which was a pretty seminal, formative, vegan junk food spot that had amazing milkshakes and desserts and vegan comfort food. And Nick and I were huge fans of that place. So a lot of the menu was inspired by Food Swings, just very humble, down-to-earth, familiar foods that just happened to be vegan. So yeah, that's how the car ride went. We just talked about the menu and where would it be, what would it look like. And that was, I would say, in October or November of 2007. And then in December of 2007, my girlfriend at the time walked into 719 East Genesee Street, the home of the original Strong Hearts. And on the third floor of that building was the Onondaga School of Therapeutic Massage. And she was in the building to buy me a gift certificate for Christmas. And on the first floor of that building was a vacant cafe space that she just happened to see. So she came home and she's like, I'm not sure if you were serious about that cafe idea, but there's a vacant one I just walked by and it sounds like exactly what you were just talking about. So the next day I went down to go look at it, and sure enough, it was almost exactly what Nick and I were talking about. And I called Nick up and I was like, remember that car ride 2 months ago? Well, I just found us a vacant cafe space. You should come look at it. So then Nick came down and looked at it. And one thing led to another. We signed a lease the next month. And we opened 4 months later in May of 2008.
What were each of you doing at that time?
Nick graduated from Syracuse University with a degree in psychology, I believe, and he was working at a group home for troubled youth out towards Auburn, New York. And I was a freelance photographer at the time. Art's kind of always been in my background. And so I was doing that, and then I was also a part-time poker player. Online poker was just starting to blow up back then, and also real-life poker. I was playing at the Turning Stone Casino. So it was a lot of odds and ends type things. I didn't have a regular 9-to-5 at that time. So I was ripe for something to hang on to and be secured to. So
I feel like the joke is you were already working restaurant hours.
Yeah, I was doing a little bit of everything. But the thought, and there was a large appeal to having something solid and steady, even though in the beginning, we didn't make any money, but just the fact that it was stable and routine really appealed to me, because I had been kind of doing the freelance thing for a long time, and I needed something more stable in my life at that time.
Yeah, I loved it. And when you guys opened, you had a very well-formed vision. The milkshakes and the milkshake names were already a very important part of the process. And, you had a slew of offerings that truly were comfort food. I don't remember if you guys started with Pizza Fridays, right from the beginning, or if that
we did.
Yeah,
we did.
So you had all these kind of components. I'm sorry to just stay at this one particular time frame, but how did that sort of menu come together, and how did that sort of game plan for these are our actual products and these are our actual offerings kind of come into fruition?
I believe Nick and I met at least once a week for a few months to kind of hash all this stuff out. He was still working full time, but we would come to the weekly meetings with just kind of notes and brainstorms and ideas. Some of the things actually that were first on our first menu, specifically the egg trick muffin, which is still on our menu to this day, was something that was born out of those potlucks we used to go to. That's something that Nick actually made at our friend Kevin's house, and it's like a vegan egg McMuffin that we call the egg trick muffin. So I would say that's one specific thing that we just workshopped at vegan potlucks prior to the restaurant opening. Pizza night, as you just mentioned, that did start on the very first week we were open. We did a regular Friday night pizza night for 11 years. For literally every Friday night, from 6 p.m. to close, we would turn Strong Hearts Cafe into like a pizzeria, and we would shut down the regular menu and just serve pizza. And it was wildly popular in 2008 and the years following. Vegan pizza was still pretty hard to find in Syracuse. We were probably the only one doing it at the time, so it was very popular very quickly. And we had no idea what we were doing for a long time. It was a big lift, but we knew people wanted it, so we kept doing it.
Yeah, so you have this 800 square foot place. Like you're stocking it up with people who are fairly like-minded, to kind of get it off the ground. Like, what was, but I still in my brain, it's like this kind of skeleton crew of people. Like when you guys opened the doors, like how many people were working with you?
We had 4 initial employees, plus myself and Nick. Yeah, we intended on opening with no employees. We intended on opening with just myself and Nick doing everything very naively, thinking, oh, this is no big deal. We'll just do this. But we were talking to one of our friends prior to the restaurant opening, someone who ended up loaning us some money. And he said, you guys, you need employees. Like you can't do the restaurant open to close every day by yourself. And he's like, I'll give you the money, but you need to have staff. So we hired 4 people, and that was very good advice.
Not bad, not bad. So what was that first year of Strong Hearts? Do you remember it? Is it like the stuff of nightmares? Like, what was that first year like, being able to have this place that you call your own and, operating it?
That first year was a blur. It's hard to really remember it. I wish I had kept a diary or jotted some notes. We were working all the time, all day, every day. At the time that Strong Hearts opened in 2008, I was renting a house in Solvay. And I remember it was a 3-bedroom house that I was renting for $600 a month. But I was never there. And it actually, like I was at the restaurant so much, we actually had a cot in the basement that Nick and I would use occasionally, because at the time we were open insane hours. We were open until like midnight or even later, and then we would reopen the next day at like 8 a.m. So there was times where, even though I only lived a 10-minute drive away, it just made sense to sleep there, because I was going to be back in a few hours anyway. So that's what the first year was like. I remember a few times actually looking out at Nick while he was doing some paperwork in the old dining room, and he was just like falling asleep. He was just like nodding because he wasn't sleeping either. I remember a story he told me within that first year where he fell asleep at a stop sign, and his car like veered off the road and hit a parked car because he fell asleep literally at a stop sign. So that was the vibe. It was just like we had no idea what we were doing. We were both much younger. We had no business experience, and we had no actual restaurant experience. But yet we were in charge of this restaurant that was already fairly popular and busy. So it was a blur. We were just working nonstop. I remember, I think for the first year straight, Nick and I paid ourselves $1,000 a month. Like that was our take for the whole month, was $1,000. And when your rent's $600 and you're never home and not eating food other than the stuff you make at the restaurant, it's doable. So it was definitely a grind. I mean, not just the first year, but probably the first 3 to 4 years. It was just an insane amount of work. And I've told people many, many times since that if someone could have shown me a movie of what my life was going to be like after the restaurant opened, but before, if I could have just seen my future for the next 3 or 4 years, I would have been like, thank you, but no, that's not for me, because I was working more and harder than I ever had for the least amount of money I had ever made. So it was tough.
Yeah. I was going to save this for the end, but I think now I want to throw it out there because I'm curious, like, one of the things I want to thank you for is that, I'm a firm believer that you like put things out in the universe and sometimes people can pick it up and sometimes they don't. And one saying that I know you didn't originate, but I heard it from you, is if your business cannot operate without you being there, you don't own a business, you have a job. And I'm curious about at what point in the Strong Hearts journey did you start to feel like you truly owned a business? Like it was truly something that could you could move away from it and it would still operate without you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it comes and goes, honestly. As you said a little while ago, we have another restaurant now in Buffalo. And there's moments where I feel like I'm right back in that first year of Strong Hearts because, I'm sort of running the Buffalo location and my business partner, Nick, is running the Syracuse location. And while the business itself is 16 years old, the Buffalo location is only 2 years old, so we're not very well established in Buffalo yet. And we're still in that nascent stage of growth. So there's a lot of times where I feel like I have a job again, and I'm not at that place in Buffalo yet. But getting back to your original question, it took a long time. I would say it took 3 to 4 years, maybe even longer, maybe even 5, where I could step back and feel like the place is not going to explode without me. And I think Nick feels that same way. We were just so committed to it being successful that we had a really hard time letting go. We had a few managers that were very competent, but when it's your baby, when it's your creation, when it's your passion project, you want it to be perfect. And over the years, I had to accept and I had to learn that having things be 98% good is good enough, because sure, they could be 100% perfect, but that means I'm never leaving, and I don't have a life outside my business, and that's no way to live. So I would say it took probably 4 to 5 years for me to feel like, okay, I can breathe. I can go out of town for a weekend. Nothing bad's going to happen. But it took me, a long time to get there.
So on the flip side too, like within that, within the time frame that Strong Hearts has been open, it's gained fascinating cult status around. I mean, there's like a running tally of people who have Strong Hearts tattoos, which is really interesting. I remember coming to your fine establishment on Genesee Street to get a special that was a collaboration with, I really wish I could remember her name, but the woman who was the private chef for Blink-182.
Yes.
And then it's written about in books. It's like referenced constantly online as like, come to Syracuse and get an Earth Crisis milkshake or whatever. Mm-hmm. How did you guys respond? It obviously, like, there's a million things to be concerned about when you're kind of operating these business, but like, do you feel like you gave yourself the space to appreciate the sort of culture that you had built?
Not at first, for sure. I mean, that kind of came with time, but being vegan for so long, I remember kind of planning my travel around where the vegan restaurants were. If I went to Boston or Chicago or LA, it would be like, I want to go to restaurant A, B, and C. And I would plan my itinerary around those specific restaurants. And now I've heard many, many people that have done the same thing with us, with Strong Hearts. Like they've come to Syracuse specifically because they want to come to Strong Hearts. And that's huge. That really means a lot to me because I know where they're coming from. We've had many, many people come up to us in Syracuse and say they chose to go to Syracuse University because Strong Hearts was in Syracuse. So that's impactful when you alter people's life plans like that. That means a lot. And I don't think about it too much, but when it is pointed out to me, when I do hear things like that, it makes me proud. It makes me proud to have been involved in something that people really care about and feel good about and plan their life around. And Nick met both of his wives at the restaurant, and there's human beings in this world that wouldn't be here if Strong Hearts wasn't here. And we've had people get engaged inside the restaurant, more than one couple. So just when you really kind of zoom out and see those things and see how it's affected people, and when you have friends, like people that you respect and looked up to, people in bands, people in Earth Crisis, come up to you and tell you how much your restaurant means to them, it's a huge honor. It's a huge compliment. And like I said, I don't dwell on it. I don't think about it. But when it is pointed out to me, I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, you guys are definitely, there's always that struggle between like, am I running a business that has an ethical leaning, an ethical goal, or have I created a brand? And it's like really cool that you've managed to do both. Because I think sometimes I see companies or businesses or initiatives that start off with a very specific purview. We are doing it because of this particular goal. And if you don't shift, you don't survive. I mean, that's the nature of things. But like, I always feel like your North Star has been, we are going to create a place that is welcoming to everybody. We are going to serve really good food, vegan or otherwise. We are going to demonstrate to people that, the vegan lifestyle, there's value in considering it, and we're gonna make sure that there's these beautiful tinges of social justice awareness through all of our places. And it's like really neat to have seen that evolve, since 2008.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And, I think when we started in 2008, it was a bit more unrefined, than it is now. Our original spot on Genesee Street looked like it was run by two hardcore kids, because we were, and we kind of still are. But we're also like actually grown up adults with experience now, a lot of life experience. And our new, quote unquote, newer restaurant in Syracuse kind of reflects that. Like, it kind of reflects the fact that we have this experience and operational knowledge now, and we're serious about it, and we want the business to grow. We've grown as adults, as people, and we want our business to reflect that. So the people that have known us from the start know what we're about, and we didn't want to lose that as we grew. So if the discerning eye will find it if it knows where to look, but Strong Hearts was founded for activist reasons. Nick and I met at the Syracuse Animal Rights Organization, which was a student activist group at Syracuse University. That's how our friendship began, and that's how the business began. We wanted Strong Hearts to be an extension of our activism, and it certainly, was very, very evident and visible in probably the first few years of the business. That hasn't gone away. We've just kind of added a little bit more refinement to it, I would say.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a quick like Cliff Notes edition of Strong Hearts, and then kind of go into a modern vernacular question if you're up for it.
Sure.
But one of the things that I think is kind of cool about your narrative is that, so, you've got this 800 square foot place run by two hardcore kids, as you just say. And then over near Syracuse University, there's a Marshall Street, and there's a place called Syracuse they're looking to sell. You end up taking that over. Longer than I had thought. You guys had it till 2021?
We were open there 7.5 years.
Yeah, like a longer jaunt than I had recalled, with a slightly different menu and a slightly different vibe. And then eventually in 2020, you decided that you would open a new space moments before a pandemic happened, or at least start renovating the space
Mm-hmm.
moments before. Which, just for listeners at home who have not been to Strong Hearts, shame on you. But the size of the kitchen of the new space is larger than the size of the entire space that was the original location.
Correct.
And then as of, what are we looking at, 2022, you guys open up the Buffalo. You end up closing the Syracuse location and opening this Buffalo location, right? And one of the things that I think is interesting within that whole journey, one is that like all these places are successful. Oh, I forgot one. And you operated the state fair for several years. Like you
Yeah.
managed to bring veganism to the state fair.
We were vendors at the New York State Fair for 5 years, which is traditionally a very, very heavily animal agricultural event.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out that the swag from those state fair tours, we'll call them, are still some of my favorite clothing that I own. But the thing that I'm curious about, Joel, is that in all that time, language has shifted in marketing from vegan products to plant-based products. And I remember you and I having a conversation once. I can't remember what it was around, but it was something where you're like, bro, plant-based is here to stay. And I'm curious about how that's changed the way in which you view that sort of like activist nature of veganism, and how it's changed the way in which Strong Hearts operates, because now people are so trained to look for plant-based to, sort of, it's a little less hard-edged than the word vegan, but it's also something that like looks so good on food packaging, apparently. Like, how has that sort of changed the way in which you perceive it?
So yeah, Strong Hearts does not use the term plant-based. We use the term vegan. The term already exists. To me personally, I am not a huge fan of the term plant-based. I don't object to people using it. It's just not something that Strong Hearts will ever use or embrace, for a couple of reasons. Like I already said, that there's already a term for that. It's called vegan. And I know that veganism and the word vegan has still probably some negative connotations. But to me, we embrace that. When I hear the term plant-based, my first thought is, what are you trying to sell me? You trying to sell me a diet program? You trying to sell me packaged food? Like, what are you trying to sell me? You trying to sell me a cookbook? That being said, if people like that term and it gets their foot in the door, then by all means use it. Like, I'm not against people using the term plant-based. It's just not something that, as someone who's been vegan for over 30 years, I don't think I need to use it and don't really want to use it. However, if that's the term you want to use, then knock yourself out. Go ahead. It's not something that I'm super into on a personal level, and Strong Hearts is not into it on a business level.
Yeah, and I can understand that from like, to go back to the evil term branding, like I can understand it from that perspective as well. But it is interesting to me. Like, I view it as like a really interesting shift in our culture, where now there are multiple avenues for companies to release vegan products and get it in the hands of new consumers, where, it used to be not that long ago that you just had to walk through like the health food aisle of, whatever grocery store to find the thing, or you were only shopping in produce. And now it's something that you're recognizing on store shelves all over the place, and it's just being consumed at a rate. Not that, I mean, I remember one time you and I talking, somebody walked into your restaurant and was like, I've never had vegan food before. And you were like, you've never had an apple? Like, it's not that people aren't having vegan food, but the idea that there's like some sort of like pride that like plant-based is a part of people's narratives, I view as like a win for our culture.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, Ryan, it's a win for animals, and that's why I'm vegan. That's why Nick is vegan. That's why Strong Hearts exists, is because we believe in animal liberation. We believe in animal rights. And like I said before, if, the term plant-based gets someone to try a vegan product, then by all means use that term. I also think it's like a net positive thing for society and for the animals. So I'm absolutely not opposed to the term. It's just not something that is in my personal lexicon.
Fair enough. So I appreciate the time that you've spent. I got just a couple of wrap up questions. And the first one is just a really important, impactful, impassionate moment for me. And that's, Joel, what is the secret to making a good milkshake? Because I can't figure it out.
Geez, that's you need to start with good ice cream. That's the big one. We use Temptation vegan ice cream, which is made by a company called Chicago Vegan Foods, which is a company owned by two other hardcore kids out of Chicago. They're grown adults now. So you really need to have a good base, and I think you need to have a really good blender. A lot of blenders that you can get for home use are not great. We use commercial Vitamixes that are, the last one we bought was over $1,000, and it's meant to make milkshakes. So if you have a really good blender, a high-end blender like a Vitamix, they don't have to cost $1,000. But number one, good ice cream. Number two, good blender. As far as whatever milk you can put in it, we've used soy, we've used almond, we've had people request oat, which is totally fine. But yeah, good base, good blender.
So the listeners who aren't from Syracuse, the reason I'm asking is because last I checked, you guys had like 48 flavors.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Is that about right? 48 different flavors of vegan milkshakes, which I am ashamed to say I have not tried all of them. I got to step it up.
There are people who have, believe it or not. It's crazy. We've had a number of people over the years that have like made their own like little personal checklist and have tried all of the Strong Hearts milkshakes. I don't believe I've even tried them all.
I will say I had the s'more one earlier this week as research material, and it was phenomenal. But do you have like a go-to milkshake flavor that's like your jam?
Oh, man. Ryan, I can't remember the last time I drank a milkshake, like an entire milkshake, a 16-ounce milkshake. I would say the seasonal ones I really like. Like we make a really good mulled apple cider milkshake that is phenomenal. It'll probably be at the restaurant soon. I really like the ones with espresso in them. Like we use actual espresso, like the chocolate espresso, the vanilla espresso. We have a coffee espresso, which uses coffee-based ice cream, and then real espresso. So I really like those. I'm also really into like the fruity ones. Pineapple raspberry being one of my favorite fruit flavors. You're never really going to go wrong with a Strong Hearts milkshake. I mean, I know I'm biased, but you're never going to have a milkshake from us and be like, oh, this sucks. Like, it's always going to be good. It's just, what are you in the mood for at the time?
Yeah, and I think the tagline I hear everybody say is like, it doesn't matter whether you're vegan or not. This is a really good milkshake. Like, top of the line.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? That's like you said before, like we don't just try to make good vegan food. We just try to have good food that happens to be vegan. That's been our whole approach since day one. That's why it's not called Strong Hearts Vegan Cafe. That's why it's just called Strong Hearts.
Well, on the flip side, so other than just eating to do healthy living, you're also a fairly athletic human. You created, was it the Vegan Power Run Team? Or
Strong Hearts Vegan Power, yeah.
Strong Hearts, and I'm curious about the genesis of that, because I always remember seeing you guys do it, like, oh, we're doing these runs or whatever, and it's like, cool, I'm going to just keep, eating guacamole and sitting on my couch. Like, what was the genesis of that group, and what kind of like distances and runs did you do?
So that group started in 2013, and it kind of was born out of my own personal fitness journey. I hate that word, but so from 2008 to 2013, I was working a lot, but I was also eating a lot because I had anything I ever wanted within arm's reach at all times, including cupcakes and desserts and milkshakes. And I had put on a decent amount of weight. I was pushing 200 pounds, which I'd never weighed that much in my life. So I remember one day I walked up the stairs to my home and I got to the top and I was winded, and I was in my 30s and I'm like, something's got to change here. So I talked with some friends and very, very slowly started to run to lose weight. I did one of those couch to 5K programs where you kind of run a little bit more each day, run, walk type thing. And that's how my running thing started. And later in 2013, there's an event called a Ragnar Relay, which is like a 12-person running relay event where you run against other teams, but the total distance is like 200 miles. So between the 12 people on the team, you kind of split the distances up and run a relay style race until the whole distance is covered. And I was talking with a friend of mine, and I was like, we know enough vegans who can do this. So we found 10 other vegans, and we had 12 people total go up to the Adirondacks, and we ran a relay race from Saratoga Springs to Lake Placid. And that was the first Strong Hearts Vegan Power team, and we've had one every year since. We've done dozens of events. And once word got out that vegans were on the road and running, it kind of spread and more people wanted to join, and it kind of became its own thing. So we still do events. The group is still active. I don't run quite as much as I used to. I do still exercise and run. But yeah, that was just kind of born out of me wanting to lose weight and stay fit and young and healthy. And a lot of friends were on board, and it just kind of took off.
Yeah, and I'd read at one point you guys had enough people to have 3 full teams for that relay.
I think at our peak it was probably 2017 or 2018, we actually had 4 teams run the Ragnar, Pennsylvania race. So 48 vegan runners on the road. And, you know, we all have the same gear on, the same shirts. It's like a black jersey with white writing. It's very identifiable. And when that many people with the same shirt on are running a race, like, you stand out like a sore thumb. And it really was a fantastic platform to spread the message of ethical veganism, because a lot of people, even back then and even now, think that vegans can't be endurance athletes. They can't be strong. They can't compete. And there's many, many athletes that are proving that wrong. And Strong Hearts Vegan Power embodied that. It's like, yes, we can compete. And we've had teams win events, which is a powerful statement when you're blowing by other teams that think all vegans are weak, scrawny people. And there's not much to say when you're in first place. So
that's awesome. I love it. And you alluded to one other question I had, so we got 2 to go if you're cool with it. And that is about the merchandise of Strong Hearts, which sounds weird, but you know, one of the things that I've always thought is so cool about your business is the fact that you kind of operate it like a band, where you've got like merchandise that's kind of rotating, and then you also operate it like a I don't know, kind of a community initiative where like you'll highlight different artists for your merchandise, which I always really think is cool. And I was curious if you could kind of shed some light onto that specific part of the business.
Yeah, I would say so. The creative side of Strong Hearts is more my vision, and the financials, the nuts and bolts, the business side of the business is more Nick. So he's the brains behind the business, and I'm more of the creative. What you see, a lot of that is from me. What's on the menu, what our merch looks like, that's mostly me. And you're right, like I'm a hardcore kid, right? So I love music, I love bands. So I'm inspired by designs from bands. I'm inspired by local artists. So when we were thinking about coming up with merch designs, it just made sense to draw inspiration from those things. So I like to think there's like a running theme of the merch, but it's all very different. There could be merch that's like very heavy metal inspired, and then there's merch that looks like a cartoon that's not like that at all, you know? So, but having many different things with a common through line, and that through line is like our brand, our logo, the S and the H with the cross knife and the heart, that's become identifiable, and that resonates with people. And, you know, most of our customers are not vegan, believe it or not, maybe not even vegetarian. And that's awesome. That's what we want. We want omnivores in Strong Hearts. That's why we started the business, to show people that vegan food could be convenient, affordable, delicious. So our merch is never like super in your face vegan, because that's not who our customers are. We sure, we get a lot of vegans, but our core customer is an omnivore who just wants a good meal, or who maybe is trying to eat healthier, or who lives in the area, works in the area. So our merch, it's not for everybody, but it's never tinged with super pro animal rights messaging, because if it was, then most of the people that come to our restaurants would not buy them. Not to say we haven't had very animal forward messaging on shirts before. We've had Earth Crisis lyrics on our shirts before, which obviously is very pro animal rights. But yeah, that's kind of the genesis of it. It's just, honestly, when I design a t-shirt or commission a t-shirt to be designed, I do what I like. And I think we were talking about this before. That's how most businesses and passion projects work, is if you do something for you and people, that resonates with people, they know it's authentic, they know it's real, they know who you are. And very, very good things are born out of ideas and projects that you do to make yourself happy. And I think that people see that. And fortunately for me and for Strong Hearts, most people like the stuff I make. So yeah, that's kind of the whole merch story.
I love it. And to your point, I think so often, like, you know, in a lot of the interviews that I was reading or listening to, you talk about the fact that like 90% of your clientele is non-vegan, and that's the goal. And, you know, like, that may be the goal, but at the same time, like when you're doing this project, you're like, we don't know who our customers are going to be. You know, it'll be these people or that people, blah, 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 and eventually they'll find that space. And I think that's just the beauty of like doing any sort of project or starting any sort of business, is just saying, I'm going to do this thing, and eventually the right people will find it. And that is how you create something amazing, as opposed to, we're going to create this thing and here's our demographic and here's how it's going to work. And it's so scripted that like it loses its soul a little bit. And I feel like the soul of Strong Hearts is so intact because of like its sort of like ability to just be a beacon for people to find.
I appreciate that. That really means a lot. And we didn't have like a core demographic in mind when we started at all. We didn't even really know what that meant back then. You know, we were just two kids trying to do something. But when we were planning the menu and the vibe and the look of the cafe, we wanted a place that we could bring our parents for lunch and they would not immediately run out of the door, you know. So it's always been our intention to be inclusive, no matter, you know, what your beliefs are. You know, omnivores, like I said before, that's who we want in the restaurant, and people of all walks of life come. You can go to our Syracuse or our Buffalo restaurant and see people from all over, all walks of life. And that's also awesome to see. It's not just angry, white, hardcore kids at Strong Hearts. It's people from all over, people who just like the food and like the vibe and want to share in that experience.
I love it. So, you know, the thing that I love about Strong Hearts is that it truly is the vision, almost the spontaneous vision from like two youths, if you will, and eventually it turns into this thing. And we've spent a lot of time talking about Strong Hearts and its narrative, and I want to end this talking about you, because I so often hear people asking you the question like, where do you see Strong Hearts in 5 years? And I don't care, because I know it's going to be awesome, and I'm excited to see that journey, and I'm excited to be surprised. But I'm curious about Joel Capolongo and like sort of like goals or hopes for yourself that you have. Like as you kind of look forward and you see this next chapter of your existence coming through, like what are things that you're hoping to accomplish or you're just looking forward to over the next few years?
Since I'm still like eyeball deep in work in Buffalo, I think our hope, I mean, it's definitely going to happen. In 5 years, I'll be able to take a few steps back from that and kind of can resume my role on the bridge of SS Strong Hearts and just help steer the company rather than being down in the engine room, tuning things every single day. So I look forward to a time where I don't have to be at work 6 days a week, which is what's happening now. And the restaurants are a little bit more self-sustainable. There's a lot that goes into that, and I don't think I'll ever be completely divorced from operational oversight, and that's fine. But it's been tough kind of reliving those first few years of Strong Hearts in Syracuse again in Buffalo. And it's taken a toll on my personal life for sure. I'm not getting any younger. I was 31 when Strong Hearts opened, so that means I'm 47 now. So in 16 more years, I'll be 63, and I won't have 6-day work weeks in me. And so just planning for that and knowing that like I'm nearing the end of being able to work 60 hours a week and planning for that. And, Nick's aware of that too. Nick's no spring chicken. He's in his 40s as well now. So we both see the writing on the wall and know that we do want the business to grow, but it has to happen without us being directly involved in the day-to-day. And for the most part, I would say we both still are. So just being able to plan for that and being able to enjoy our life a little bit more. Nick's got several children, and I know he loves being a dad, and he's married, and I have a personal life too outside of the business, and I love to travel, as you probably know, and I've been literally all over the world, but there's places I haven't been. I've been to every continent on Earth, including Antarctica. I've been to 49 of 50 states. So I want to keep traveling. I want to be able to see the world. I think it's so enriching for people when they do that. And it's truly one of my favorite things, is to travel and experience other cultures, other foods, and see how people live, because it really changes your own perspective on your own life and makes you super grateful for what you have. And I don't mean to complain about how much I work at all. I know I'm extremely privileged, and even on my worst day, when I feel like everything is falling apart and I'm at my lowest point, there's probably 4 billion people who would trade places with me instantaneously, and their prayers would be answered. I'm aware of that. And I know that I live a very privileged life because of that. So just trying to keep things in perspective and be grateful for what I have. And I think about that every single day. I'm very grateful for what I have and what Nick and I have built. And in the next 5 years, I just hope to maybe not work so much.
Fair. Well, we'll put the PMA into the universe. What is one place that you would like to visit that you haven't gone yet? Let's put it out there.
Sure. I have not been to New Zealand. Been to Australia, of course. So the neighboring country of New Zealand is actually not that close, but I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and that's where a lot of the Lord of the Rings movies were filmed. And everything I've seen and heard about New Zealand is just a very, very beautiful country. I love to hike as well, and it's a very kind of mountainous island. So I would say New Zealand is near the top of my list.
All right, we're gonna hope that a plane ticket to New Zealand makes its way to your inbox soon, Joel. I always end the show just to see if there's anything that we haven't covered that you want to kind of put out there. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to share with the listeners?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground, and I'm again very grateful and very appreciative of you having me here today.
Hey, it's been an honor, Joel. For people who are interested in either finding you or finding Strong Hearts Cafe, where do they find you on the interwebs?
For the business on Instagram, we have 2 accounts. Strong Hearts Cafe, that's the account for the Syracuse restaurant, and then the account for our Buffalo restaurant is Strong Hearts 716. Those are the Instagram handles. That's where we're most active. Personally, my Instagram handle is just my last name, Capolongo, Capolongo, and I'm on Facebook, but I don't use Facebook that much. I took it off my phone like 5 years ago, and it was an amazing move. I highly recommend that. I still am on Facebook, but only on like a desktop computer, which it doesn't happen that often. But yeah, Instagram at Capolongo, that's where you can find me and see all the food I post in my travels.
I was teaching a class today about app development, and we were defining what applications are, and the fact that like apps are designed to accomplish some sort of task for a person. And I was telling my students, like, yeah, and if you need to just get angry, you just open the Facebook app and that will instantly turn your mood. So kudos to you for doing something that I should probably find the courage to do as well, Joel.
Thank you, Ryan.
Well, cool. Well, Joel, thanks so much for coming to hang out and for keeping Strong Hearts awesome and for keeping my belly full and just for being a good human. It was an honor having you on the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Oh, Joel, everyone's favorite vegan rock star. Joel, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thanks so much for making the trek from Buffalo to Syracuse just so we could have that conversation in person. And thanks so much for the inspiration. I wasn't kidding when I said that there's certain taglines and ethics and just approaches to existence that you've put out there that have been really beneficial to me. And I know I'm not alone in that. So from me to all of the people who have benefited from you and Nick's work with Strong Hearts, thanks so much. And for listeners who, now are familiar with the Strong Hearts brand, I strongly suggest taking a trip to either their Buffalo or Syracuse location. There's a million great places to eat in our neck of the woods, but very few of them truly feel as welcoming, both from the interior design of the space to the food that you put in your stomach, as Strong Hearts. So go check it out. Have a milkshake. You won't be sorry. Coming up next on Meditations with Ryan Zlomek, on November 6th, I'm interviewing Tommy Lincoln. Tommy is the owner and creator of Stay Fresh Design, which maybe means something to you, maybe doesn't, but he's a graphic designer and I'll call him a design creative that has done a ton of work, from everything from the 1911 beer cans to Heirloom to work for Kevin Smith and the View Askew Productions, to working on Mayor Ben Walsh's campaign. And Tommy's somebody who's had a lot of success and has really put his mark on the city of Syracuse, but also is somebody who wants to pay it back. And in this conversation, we talk about the importance of him creating an art gallery that's tied to his business in the on the first floor of the Delavan. So if you're interested in design, check back for Tommy Lincoln on November 6th. And equally, if you're listening and you're kind of curious about the back catalog, on episode 3, I interviewed Dave Foreman, who was the host of a TV show called Played at Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we talk about the sort of culture of food and Michelin stars and how all that stuff works. On episode 9, I interview CJ Butler, who is the communications manager of the Salt City Market here in Syracuse, and she talks about the infrastructure of that business and the way it helps incubate entrepreneurs in our city in some really cool ways. And if you need more vegan sweets in your life, episode 14, I have Jennifer Johnson on the show, who is based in Rochester, is the former owner of Misfit Donuts and the current owner of Isotope Desserts, which both created amazing vegan offerings. And I really just got to give her a shout out because Isotope is awesome. Equally, if you need more art in your life, on episode 21 of the show, I interviewed Tim Jacobus, which for any of you Scholastic Book Fair kids, you'll remember the Goosebumps books from the 1990s. Tim Jacobus was the cover artist for all of those books, and he gives the lay of the land of his career in episode 21. And equally for the more Syracuse-centric people, on episode 23, I interview Cayetano Valenzuela, who painted the We Are the Mighty Salt City mural, which is right outside Fireman's Park, which has become a huge icon for our city. But he's also just an amazing freelance artist and designer that talks about his career and the way in which he got things going. He's done everything from this point to painting murals, to painting signs, to doing comics, and making cool merchandise for Strong Hearts and the Deftones. Like, how rad is that? So if you're interested in the back catalog, please go check it out and see if there's anything that speaks to you and see what else you can learn from it. If you're interested in learning more about me, you can find @Ryan Zlomek on Instagram, The World of Ryan Zlomek on Facebook, @Ryan Zlomek on TikTok. You can email me meditations@ryanzlomek.com, or you can check out my business, the Skillshot Arcade, located on Malloy Road, which is a pinball arcade that I own and operate, and where I was lucky enough to interview Joel. So I want to thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard, please share it with friends, like, subscribe, and give a review, because that's really how word gets out there. But most importantly, self-promotion aside, I hope you make space for conversation because you just might learn something. Please go have an amazing, super duper, and tasty week.